It was exactly 2:30 in the morning, that specific, heavy time of night when the boundary between the living world and the unknown seems to dissolve. The atmosphere was thick, suffocating, and draped in a profound silence. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, only the monotonous, rhythmic chirping of crickets hidden in the tall grass. Above, the sky was strangled by a blanket of charcoal black clouds, pressing down on the earth as if a malevolent force intended to swallow the world whole. Rakib was navigating his way through this dense, labyrinthine jungle road on his aging motorcycle. The engine hummed a steady, comforting rhythm against the oppressive quiet, until without warning, the headlight flickered violently. Once, twice, and then darkness. With a dying mechanical groan, the bike sputtered and came to a complete halt. Rakib kicked the starter lever desperately, sweat beading on his forehead, but the machine was dead. It was as if the metal itself had lost the will to move. Forced to abandon the vehicle, Rakib pulled out his mobile phone. The harsh, white beam of the flashlight sliced through the darkness, revealing a sight that made his blood run cold. Standing just a few yards away, looming like a tombstone in the mist, was a colossal two-story estate. It was a ruin of a house, a decaying monument to a forgotten time. The plaster had peeled away from the walls like dead skin, exposing the red brick ribs underneath. To Rakib, it didn't look like a building. It looked like a starving beast, bearing its skeleton and laughing at him. He felt a strange magnetic pull, an invisible rope tied around his waist, dragging him toward the rusted iron gate. His rational mind screamed at him to run, but his body disobeyed. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold, corroded metal of the gate. Instantly, it swung open with a piercing metallic shriek, welcoming him into its belly. The house that breathes. Rakib's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. He crossed the overgrown courtyard, the dry leaves crunching loudly under his boots like brittle bones. As he stepped onto the veranda, a wall of stench hit him, a thick, nauseating odor of rotting biological matter, reminiscent of dead rats or decaying flesh that had been festering for weeks. He pressed a handkerchief to his nose, his breath coming in shallow, fearful gasps. He pushed the main door. It offered no resistance, swinging inward on silent hinges. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world changed. The chirping of the crickets outside was instantly severed, replaced by a grave-like stillness. He swept his flashlight beam across the cavernous darkness. It was a grand hall, dominated by a massive, dust-choked chandelier that hung from the ceiling like a giant spider. In the far corner, illuminated briefly by the sweeping light, sat an old wooden easy chair. It was rocking. Creak, creak, creak. The sound echoed rhythmically in the empty space, though there was no wind to move it. Rakib stared, paralyzed, feeling the intense weight of eyes upon him. He was certain someone was sitting there, invisible, watching his terror grow. Then a voice, cold and dry as dead leaves, whispered directly into his ear. "Why have you come? You will not be able to return." Rakib spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly, but the hall was empty. The whisper lingered in the air, a poisonous promise, summoning every ounce of courage. He moved toward the staircase. The wooden steps groaned under his weight, threatening to snap with every ascent. At the top of the stairs lay a long, suffocating corridor. Doors lined both sides, all shut tight, except for one at the very end. From that final room, a dim, crimson light bled out into the hallway. It beckoned him. As he walked down the corridor, he passed rows of ancient oil paintings. The portraits were covered in decades of dust, but the eyes of the painted figures seemed wet and alive. He could feel their gazes tracking him, rolling in their painted sockets with inhuman cruelty. The melody of death. Rakib stood before the final door. The smell of rot was overpowering here, stinging his eyes. He pushed the door open to reveal a chamber of horrors. The floor was not visible. It was carpeted in bones. thousands of them. Some were small, animal-like, but others were undeniably human skulls and femurs. In the center of this ossuary sat a broken bed, and upon it, a female figure. Her back was turned to him. Her hair was unnaturally long, cascading down the floor like a dark river. She was humming a tune, a haunting, melancholic melody that sounded like a mother weeping for a lost child. "Who are you?" Rakib's voice was a trembling whisper. "What are you doing here?" The humming ceased abruptly. The silence that followed was louder than a scream. The woman did not turn her body. Instead, her head began to rotate, slowly, sickeningly. Her neck twisted a full 180 degrees until she was facing him. Rakib's scream died in his throat. She had no face. Where facial features should have been, there was only a gaping, ragged hole. Black smoke and crawling insects poured from a void. With an ear-splitting shriek, she scrambled backward off the bed, not touching the floor, but climbing straight up the wall. She moved with the unnatural speed of a lizard, scuttling onto the ceiling to hang directly above him. "I am hungry," she hissed, her voice a distorted gargle. Saliva dripped from her open cavity, landing on the floorboards with a hiss, burning the wood black. "It has been so long since I smelled fresh meat." Rakib tried to run, but his feet felt fused of floorboards. The woman lunged. Rakib tore himself free at the last second, sprinting into the corridor. Behind him, the sound 100 footsteps erupted, a stampede of invisible entities chasing him down. He reached the stairs, stumbled, and fell, tumbling violently down the wooden steps and crashing onto the cold floor of the main hall. The trap, groaning in pain, Rakib tried to stand, but his leg was injured. He looked up at the easy chair. It was no longer empty. Sitting there was an old man dressed in the regal attire of a feudal landlord from centuries past. But there was something wrong. The man had no head. Blood pulsed rhythmically from the severed stump of his neck, flowing down onto the floor and moving toward Rakib like a sentient red serpent. Panic overtook reason. Rakib crawled toward the main door, his fingernails scraping against the stone floor. But before he could reach it, the heavy door slammed shut with a thunderous boom. He pounded on the wood, screaming for help, but his voice was swallowed by the house. Suddenly, a grip like iron clamped around his ankle. Rakib looked back in horror. The severed head of the landlord had rolled across the floor and bitten into his pant leg, its teeth locking tight. The head laughed, a cackling, wet sound that shook the foundations of the house. The chandelier above began to sway violently, crashing down in an explosion of glass. From the shadows, black, smoky hands emerged from the walls, reaching for him. Rakib closed his eyes, accepting his death. But then, a sound pierced through the chaos, the cry of a child. It came from beneath the floor. A floor tile near him shifted, and a small, pale hand reached out. "Help me!" A voice sobbed from the darkness below. Without thinking, Rakib grabbed the small hand. Immediately, the grip tightened with superhuman strength. It was cold as ice. The hand wasn't asking for help. It was pulling him. Rakib tried to resist, but he was dragged swiftly downward, sinking into the earth as if the floor were made of quicksand. Darkness consumed him, the dungeon of skulls. Rakib awoke to a throbbing headache and the smell of damp earth and metallic blood. He was in pitch darkness. He tried to move his arms, but found them shackled with heavy, rusted chains to a stone pillar. He was in a dungeon, an underground torture chamber. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, illuminated only by his flickering flashlight, lying a few feet away, he saw the walls. They were not made of stone, but of human skulls, stacked row upon row, staring at him with hollow sockets. "Kosh, kosh, kosh." A scratching sound echoed from the corner. Rakib turned his head. The small child who had pulled him down was sitting there, facing the wall, scratching the stone with long, jagged fingernails. The boy was naked, his skin a translucent, sickly white. "Please," Rakib whispered. "Untie me." The boy stopped scratching. He stood up and turned around. Rakib gasped. The child had no eyes, only burning red embers in the sockets. His mouth was sewn shut with thick, black industrial thread. When the boy spoke, his lips did not move. The voice resonated directly inside Rakib's skull, a demonic distortion. "Welcome to the feeding ground. The master is very hungry tonight." The boy pointed a bony finger toward the far end of the dungeon. A heavy wooden door groaned open, and a green, poisonous fog rolled in. Heavy footsteps shook the ground. Hoot, hoot, hoot. Out of the mist emerged the Headless Landlord. He carried his own severed head in his left hand and a massive, rusted butcher's cleaver in his right. The severed head grinned, its eyes scanning the room. "Fresh meat," the head spoke, its voice jagged and cruel. "My grandson brought us a feast." From the ceiling, the faceless woman descended, crawling down like a spider. Her stomach slid open with intestines dragging on the floor. Rakib pulled frantically at his chains, the metal cutting into his wrists. He saw an old diary lying in the dust near the boy. The page was open, written in blood. "We made a pact for eternal life, but the devil tricked us. Now we are cursed to eat flesh forever. Only the blood of a traveler on the new moon grants us peace." Today was the new moon, the great escape. The headless man raised a giant cleaver. The faceless woman hissed, preparing to pounce. Rakib surged with adrenaline. As the cleaver whistled down through the air, he threw his body to the right. The blade struck the stone pillar, sparking fire and shattering the rusted chain link. His hand was free. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the faceless woman in her open wound, sending her shrieking into the darkness. He scrambled across the floor, dodging another swing of the cleaver. He spotted a ventilation shaft high on the wall, climbing a pile of crushing skulls. He hauled himself up. The demon child grabbed his shoe, but Rakib kicked it off, pulling himself into the narrow tunnel. He crawled through the suffocating shaft, the screams of the monsters echoing behind him. "You cannot run. You belong to us." He burst out of the tunnel, into the cool night air of the jungle. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out. Finally, he reached the main road. A truck was approaching. He waved his arms frantically, and the vehicle screeched to a halt. The driver, a shadowed figure, leaned over and opened the door. Rakib collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air. "Thank you," he cried. "Just drive. Please, just drive." The truck sped off. Rakib began to relax, believing the nightmare was over. He looked at the driver to thank him again. The driver turned his head. A deep, jagged scar ran around his neck, as if his head had been cut off and sewn back on. On the dashboard sat a small doll, an exact replica of the demon child with the stitched mouth. The driver smiled a terrible, knowing smile. "Sir, you forgot your shoe back at the bungalow. We have to go back to get it. Didn't we tell you? No one leaves the cursed bungalow." The eternal loop. Rakib screamed and slammed his fist against the locked door, but the truck was speeding back into the darkness. Desperate, he grabbed a fire extinguisher from under the seat and smashed the side window. Glass shattered into diamonds in the night. He threw himself out of the moving truck, hitting the asphalt hard and rolling into the thorny bushes. Bruised and bleeding, he limped through the fog. He saw a light ahead. Hope flared in his chest. Perhaps a village? But as the mist cleared, his blood turned to ice. He was standing in front of the rusted iron gate of the bungalow. The house loomed over him, more menacing than before. But what terrified him most was what he saw at the gate. There was an old motorcycle, and a young man was trying to kickstart it. Rakib squinted. The man was him. It was Rakib, from an hour ago. He tried to scream, "Don't go in, run," but no sound came out. He ran toward his other self, trying to push him away, but his hands passed through the body like smoke. He looked down at his own hands. They were translucent, fading into the night air. The realization hit him with the weight of a grave marker. He had never escaped the dungeon. The cleaver hadn't missed. He had died in that dark chamber, and what was running now was just his soul, trapped in denial. The main door of the house flew open. The headless landlord stood there, holding Rakib's fresh, severed head. The demon child stood beside him, writing a new name in the diary. The spirit of Rakib watched in silent horror as his living self pushed open the gate and walked onto the veranda, destined to repeat the nightmare. The iron gate slammed shut with a final, deafening clang, sealing the loop for all eternity. So, if you are ever driving down a lonely jungle road in the dead of night, and you see a dilapidated house with a flickering light in the window, do not stop. Do not look. Keep your eyes on the road, because in the world of the cursed, death is not the end. It is only the beginning of hunger.